We've only got 9 players in the queue, by the way.
Yeah, it was
I think
13 when I played last. Yeah, I think we go trios.
Yeah, I think we'll have to. In my previous video on skill-based matchmaking, I talked about a number of features that I thought could help or improve the current SBMM system. There was, however, one feature towards the end which I didn't go into much detail on, which I think could have a huge impact on improving the quality of the game, and not just around skill-based matchmaking. Before I get into this discussion, I would like to ask for your help. While I'd love it if you click the like button if you enjoy this video, much more important to me at the moment is the subscribe button. I'm currently only 25 subscribers away from reaching the goal of 100, at which point YouTube will let me change my URL to a human readable form. So I hope you can help me out in this endeavor. I stream on Twitch every evening from around 7 or 8 p.m. Pacific time and often talk about features and game design issues while playing Apex Legends. Please feel free to come by and join me on the channel, the link in the description below. Currently in Apex Legends, the only time you can access the server selection screen is when you first start the game and before you click continue to enter the lobby screen. You can see here that if I press tab on the PC, I get to see a list of all the respawn servers available with an average ping time of each server. By default, it will pick the server with the lowest ping, and all evidence indicates that once this choice is made, the server you will play on as long as you are solo or a squad leader will remain the same. Once in game, if you join someone else's squad, you will then play against their current server, and all teams you meet are drawn from the pool of players connected to that server. So why is this a problem? To dig into that, we need to crunch some numbers. Based on Wikipedia, EA has reported that there is between 8 and 10 million players on Apex each week. If we assume that at any given point, the best case scenario is probably at most 6 million of these are online at any point in time. At this moment, we have no crossplay, so let's be generous again and say that about a third of those players are on PC, giving us 2 million online. I'm sure it's closer to 1 million, but let's go with 2 for now. If we look at the server list, we can see that Respawn has 15 of 43 servers allocated to the US, or just over a third. So let's be generous and say that 2/3 of the players online at any given point in time are from the US, which gives us about 666,000 players on the US servers. If we split those players evenly across servers, we now have 44,000 players on each matchmaking server. That sounds pretty good, but now let's look at the breakdown of skill levels. The only numbers we have on this is the ranked play distributions, which are not a perfect indicator of skill distributions, but it gives us something to go on. Pretty likely that a high percentage of the best players in the game would at least rank to master if they are capable of doing so. So for the last ranked season, we had a master and pred players by percentage at around 0.31%. If we take 0.31% of 44,000 players, we end up with 137 players at this level. And remember, this is very much the best case scenario. If you're playing on a West Coast server when it's prime time on the East Coast, or if it's just 2 a.m. in the morning, then those numbers will be much lower. If we instead take all the Diamond Plus players, we end up with just over 2,000 players of Diamond or above. Now you also need to remember that games do not always start in lockstep. At any given point in time, since games take 15 to 20 minutes to conclude, and if matchmaking in trios is taking about 30 seconds or less to complete, then there will be dozens of matches running concurrently, further taking high-level players out of the potential matchmaking pool. This split gets even worse if you now realize that there are 3 to 4 modes available at any given point in time, with trios, duos, ranked, and potentially an LTM. All these numbers bump up a little at the start of a new season, but after the first week or two, they drop down again. With all this going on, the matchmaking system has to broaden its bands it pulls players from in order to stop queues from taking many minutes, which means all the available Diamond Plus players trying to queue suddenly drop down into the next tier of players. This doesn't happen randomly, it happens to the next best players. So if you get to be pretty good at the game, you suddenly find you're constantly going up against the best players in the game. And from the Masters' point of view, they're always playing against the same few top-tier players, which leads to boredom and burnout. An even bigger issue with all of this comes when we talk about ranked play, where on a given server there might only be a handful of Masters Plus players, so every game they play they're being pulled down into lower ranked games, and late at night you may end up with even all the Diamond players regularly joining Platinum lobbies. So how do we solve this issue? The answer is relatively simple in concept, although I can only give my best guess as a professional developer on how much effort it would take, while having to admit I don't know the specifics of Respawn's codebase. As I briefly touched on in my previous video, the solution is to move the matchmaking screen to the lobby screen. But more importantly than this is for the matchmaking system to assign you to a lobby server at the time you click join match, rather than just when you first start the game. By doing this, the game is able to constantly load balance the servers in creative ways to maximize population densities as required to avoid those issues. Now, the exact algorithm and how much of the choice is controlled by the client, how much is directed by the servers, is a deeper design challenge. But the goal would be to create clumps of players that maximize the usage of as few servers as are required to handle the load and provide reasonable ping times. If we look at the distribution of servers in the US, we can see that there are three bands of servers from west, central, and east sides of the US, with a split of 6, 5, and 6 servers respectively. Let's say we're moving into a quiet time on the West Coast. If the numbers were to drop to, say, 1/5 of their peak numbers, you could have all the West Coast players use one matchmaking lobby, while perhaps on the East Coast all 6 servers are being used. As you can see here, the difference in ping times from each zone is only 20 milliseconds. So if I play on a West Coast server versus a central server, I'm going from 35 milliseconds to 55, which is still a pretty solid ping time. I regularly play with friends on the East Coast, and even with 75 milliseconds, it doesn't seem to be a huge issue. There may be a little bit more latency, and maybe occasionally someone ends up shooting me when I'm behind a wall, but it really doesn't seem to have been a major issue. Ultimately, though, let's say that it's 4 a.m. on the West Coast and 7 a.m. on the East Coast, and hardly anybody is playing. At this point, just put everybody on one or two of the central servers, and nobody has a ping time that's more than 20 milliseconds greater than their optimal ping time. Even during busy times when there might be plenty of players in general, but perhaps the number of Master Plus level players is low, you could just congregate all of those players onto one central server. Let's take a look at how this changes the numbers in this scenario. Let's just say there are only 500,000 players playing on the US servers at a given point in time. We end up with about 1,500 master level players who we could clump together onto one server, which then gives us a much broader range of players to go up against versus the 150 that we had earlier. And if we include all the Diamond Plus players into that category, we now have 23,000 plus players in the pool, enough to populate many games of ranked trios and duos, while not having to drop these players down into lower level areas. You might also be wondering if their architecture would allow you to jump from server to server like this, but the game can already do this, as any time I leave or join a squad, I dynamically get switched between servers, so it's clearly something that the game can do. I should also quickly point out here that the servers we are talking about are not those used to play the actual game. It's almost guaranteed that these servers are used to allocate players to a specific match, and then the actual game lobby is passed off to a game player server, of which there will be thousands of instances at any given location to actually handle gameplay. A couple of minor things that also need to be addressed is manual server selection. An argument could be made for simply not allowing players to choose a specific server, which I think is a valid option. But if that's not the case, then you would need a checkbox that is off by default that allows players to say, keep my current server, and let them then click on a server to use. You may also want to have a checkbox to prioritize ping time over server population, for example, or perhaps a slider or a value that you can specify the maximum ping time that you're willing to accept. These are minor details that would need to be thought out in the final design. So how much work would all this take? I can only take my best guess from my experience and the limited information I have about their system, but I would think it would take maybe about a week or so for a team to come up with a design concept, maybe another 2 weeks for a senior dev to create the code, and perhaps another week or two for a UI designer to update the server selection screen. You'd then need at least a month of testing and bug fixing to fine-tune the system and get it solid. I think if it was prioritized, you could imagine a system like this could be made available by next season. I do think that making server population distributions more intelligent could dramatically reduce queue times for modes like duos, make ranked experience more consistent, and generally improve the skill-based matchmaking system by providing more players at each skill band. As I've discussed before, I think of most of SBMM should be changed in favor of random matches. You can see a more detailed discussion of this topic in the video linked here and in the description below. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to hit the like button, and I'd even more appreciate a sub, which will not only help me out, but let you know when I post new videos. I look forward to reading your comments or seeing you in my live stream. And as always, happy gaming.
Reloading.
Scanning the area.
Shot. Headshot. Watch your ammo, though.
And I just reloaded.
All Father, give me sight.
You only have a clip and a half left, is what I meant.
Yeah.
Bless me with
Oh, there we
sight.
go. Someone's down there.
They're gonna try to take it from underneath.
Marking my surroundings.
In progress.
They're running.
Yeah.
Marking our surroundings.
Oh, he used his ult, huh?
Thank you.
He's scanning them constantly. You might be time to switch to the PK if they didn't grab it. Ah, shit, it's outside. Oh, it's outside the circle. Oh well. There's
All Father, give me sight.
Round 6. Beginning ring countdown.
Axta out!
We are not all in
4
the ring.
people.
Drone not ready!
In combat. Reloading.
You guys still have ring.
Yep.
They don't. They have to come up to you. Do not go down there.
No, I'm not going down unless I
Do
fall.
not go down there.
Scanning the area.
Don't fall. Seriously, they can't get up on you. No way. They're dead. You won this game.
Yeah.
Stay up on high
Recharging
ground.
my shields.
Stay in that ring.
The ring's going to kill him, guys. Just wait.
Took out a hostile. Hit the ejector seat.
Okay, bro.
Or the Apex champions.
Had a decent match, Fatal, yeah.